Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, a very warm welcome to this evening's episode of The Watchdog. Thank you for tuning in. On the show tonight,
we have noted with interest the pushback and objections from environmental lobby groups against the development of these resources.
Mineral and Energy Minister Gwede Mantashe lashes out at those opposed to gas and oil exploration. We bring together government and civil society representatives to debate the issues. On a day, South Africa joined the rest of the world today to commemorate International Anti-Corruption Day. We ask, is South Africa winning or losing the war against corruption? Government, civil society organizations, academics used the opportunity to reflect on our collective efforts to fight the scourge. Well, South Africa today joined the rest of the world to commemorate International Anti-Corruption Day. Government, civil society organizations, academics used the opportunity to reflect on our collective efforts to fight the scourge. Now, for its part, the government says it is satisfied that significant inroads are being made in the fight against corruption. At its meeting yesterday, Cabinet reflected on some of the progress it said is being made by the country's law enforcement agencies. Now, among them, government is proud of the fact that 56 cases have been investigated by the Special Investigations Unit, and as those cases are now before the courts, involving contracts to the tune of 62 billion rands. 64 cases are before the Special Tribunal, involving almost 7 billion rands worth of contracts that were irregularly and unlawfully awarded. The SIU has already frozen pension benefits of former civil servants, bank accounts and assets of individuals and businesses amounting to more than 43 billion rands. Cabinet and its head, the president, who has signed a total of 9 SIU proclamations in the current financial year, believe these developments and more will go a long way in the fight against the corruption pandemic. Here's the minister in the presidency addressing a media briefing this morning.
Corruption, whether large or small, remains one of the greatest challenges facing the country and holds back economic growth and social development. Cabinet remains encouraged that the justice system continues to take decisive steps to bring those who are found to have been involved in acts of corruption to account. The Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption, and fraud in the public sector, including organs of state, is scheduled to submit its final report to President Cyril Ramaphosa on Saturday, 1st January 2022.
Now, several civil society organizations today held seminars. They had panel discussions about this scourge, and among them was the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, which used to this day to mobilize other civil society formations. And among the demands at that seminar was for the Guptas to be returned to the country to face the music. Listen to Frank Chikane, who was among the people who addressed the Ahmed Kathrada's function today to commemorate International Anti-Corruption Day.
I would like to thank the Kathrada Foundation for taking the lead in launching this campaign to bring the Guptas back to South Africa, to to face the charges of corruption, fraud, and racketeering. We have made this call before, and thank you for responding to this call, that we need to mobilize the international community to assist us to put pressure on the United Emirates to make sure that the Guptas are brought back here to face the charges. As many of you would know, the Defend Our Democracy campaign came into being early this year because of the toxic mix of corruption, criminality, and capture of the stage, which threatened our democracy. It is one thing to deal with corruption only, which is a major problem in the international space. But when that gets brought together with criminality and the capture of the state, then it threatens our democracy.
Now, to discuss these issues further, I am joined on the line by organizations that have been at the forefront in this fight against corruption. Corruption Watch is a non-profit organization that has been at the forefront of this fight since its establishment in January 2012. Melusi Ngala is one of its researchers. We're also joined by the Rhodes University-based Public Service Accountability Monitor that has also been at it for decades. Now, Zuki Swakota is their head of monitoring and advocacy. Good evening to both of you. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Good evening, Vuyo, and thank you for having me.
Right. If I may start with you, Melusi, just maybe an overall statement from where you are sitting as Corruption Watch. Are we winning or losing this war?
Almost feels like we are stagnant, does it not? I mean, we see for a moment encouraging signs, and then next moment we hear about PPE corruption, for example, or we hear of other political elites being involved in grand or political corruption. Then we wonder, where are we heading as a country? And then when there is a lack of accountability, because that's what people are often crying out for, then we definitely see the red flags, and then we think to ourselves, maybe we are not winning this battle, but we remain encouraged because whistleblowing remains a key factor in terms of how we address corruption. Each and every whistleblower that's out there brings us a step closer to reducing the impact of corruption or even corruption itself on society.
Zugiswa, from where you sit?
No, thanks, Vuyo. I'd agree to some extent with Melusi. I think there is definite stagnation in some areas, and in others, the sense is that we are losing the fight. And at the same time, there are some positive, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. So it's I would say it definitely is a mixed bag, depending on which aspect of anti-corruption interventions and the fight we are looking at.
Let's start then where I started, which was comments that were made this morning by the minister in the presidency, Mondli Gungubele. He was briefing journalists on the outcomes of a cabinet meeting yesterday, where where cabinet discussed or acknowledged some of the progress they say state law enforcement agencies are making. We're talking about the 56 cases that the SIU has investigated and are now before the courts, and you're talking there, contracts to the tune of 62 billion rands. We're talking about pension benefits of civil servants that have been frozen. And I would imagine, that is the good start that you both are talking about. But of course, as we know, as we heard, throughout this week, the National Prosecuting Authority, lamenting the fact that they are not able to move with the sort of requisite, speed in prosecuting these cases. And one of the problems, they say, is in fact the investigative capacity of state institutions, which, as part of this whole state capture, project, were hollowed out, and their capacity was seriously compromised. From where you are sitting, is the promise of Cyril Ramaphosa and his cabinet and everyone else alongside or next to him really bearing the fruits, that we have been promised? Are they delivering on their promise to actually deal with this scourge, prosecute people, put them behind? Are they resourcing, these very institutions that are supposed to do the real work in bringing these people to book and, of course, paying back the money? Melusi?
Yeah, we're, on the one hand, we need to look at whether these law enforcement agencies, are they given the resources to actually capacitate themselves to a point where they can investigate and successfully prosecute cases of corruption. And then on the other hand, we also need to look at whether when the government wants to pat itself on the back in terms of inroads made in relation to prosecuting people who are corrupt, who are those people? Are those people actually the political elite, or are they the small fish? Because that's what people are also asking, that, it's good and well to say that we're going to hold public servants or even people on the lower ranks accountable for their actions. But corruption, as far as people are concerned, is happening all the way into the presidency's office. The mere fact that his spokesperson, well, at least former spokesperson for now, was also implicated on some level, is worrisome. So it makes you wonder then, to what extent is the rot going? Is it also that much? How much do we need to make of the fact that the ruling party, its key members, are implicated in forms of corruption?
The last time the Minister of Police was here, Zugiswa, he made the point that indeed the police are under-resourced, but saying, resources are not limitless. Shamila Batoy this week, when we were talking to her, and she made a similar point. And just those two, from the conversations we're having with them here on the program, we're saying as far as they think it is possible, they are being resourced. But of course, those resources fall short of the resources that they actually need to do the best they can. Do we cut, government some slack, given the fact that our economy, is not doing well, and the COVID-19 pandemic has just made things worse? Or do we say, no, actually, you can still do better, even with the resources you currently have at your disposal?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. We absolutely do say you can do better. You must do better. I think it's quite fortuitous or serendipitous that the Auditor General's PFMA 2020 and 2021 financial year audit outcomes were released yesterday. And there's definitely some very instructive findings, that the AG's office have issued, not just in sort of the regular audit outcomes of public entities, of SOEs, of government departments, but actually also some interesting insights on the performance in the context of procurement. And as we know, procurement is across the board within the public services a fundamental area of misuse and corruption. So I think if we were in a position right now to say about the state, about the various entities, that current budgets, current resourcing was being utilized to its optimum capacity. And with that, despite that there isn't enough money to appoint highly skilled prosecutors, highly skilled investigators within the various entities, to ensure that law enforcement agencies are equipped with the best of the best personnel. That would be a different story. But where we sit right now in the context of public finance management, in the context of resource management within public entities, I think there certainly is vast scope to improve expenditure, to improve the use of resources. And in fact, there's definitely scope to really start to talk about, when we speak about SOEs and bailouts, what might it look like if SOEs, for example, were being managed prudently, finances were as they should be. What might that look like for the budgets for entities like the SIU, like the NPA, like the South African Revenue Services, who have also in the past indicated that they've been under-resourced? Or rather, that's key programs have could benefit from financial boosts. So I think at this point we can really safely and quite explicitly say not enough is being done, whether it is about prudent financial management and then punitive actions in the instances where accounting officers are found to just not doing enough. We've heard enough from the AG's reports over the years, and certainly yesterday there were some sobering comments coming through. So that's where really I think we are at this point. So underfunding of entities like the SIU, like the NPA, inadequate funding of pronouncements that relate, for example, to the national anti-corruption strategy. We cannot for a moment say that, well, there aren't enough funds, because in fact, funds are not being used prudently across the board in this country.
Melusi, I mean, your organization yesterday, talking about this day, you used the opportunity to pay tribute to whistleblowers, people who risk life and limb, to expose corruption. And incidentally, this morning, the 6 men accused of killing Gauteng Health whistleblower Babita Diokaran appeared before the courts, seeking bail. Now, do you think we're doing enough, or on the part of the state is doing enough to protect these people who risk it all, so that we can deal with the scourge?
No, certainly not, Vuyo. Whistleblowers play a very instrumental role, critical role, in fact, in how we understand corruption and criminal activities in South Africa, and in holding those who are in power to account. And when we consider the kind of victimization that whistleblowers are subjected to, and the lack of protection in some instances, it's appalling. So it was in that spirit, because we value whistleblowers. In fact, our entire model is premised on receiving whistleblower accounts, that we actually conducted this survey looking at how South Africans feel about whistleblowing. And, they felt at least over 2,000 people that we surveyed, a large majority of them felt that the government could do definitely more in capacitating or at least resourcing law enforcement, such as the South African Police Service, but also perhaps even go as far as to establish an agency that will specifically deal with advising and supporting whistleblowers, be it legally, mental health, financial support, because that's something that we also need to consider. But that said, even though the situation may not be comforting when it comes to whistleblowing in South Africa, we need to take pride in the fact that people are still willing to whistleblow. In fact, from this survey, we learned that over 3/4 of people are more than willing to whistleblow, and it's on a vast amount of issues that they're willing to whistleblow.
In fact, Tugiswa, the survey that Melusi is talking about, which whose results were released by Corruption Watch yesterday, entitled "Daring to Act: Perceptions on Whistleblowing in South Africa." Corruption Watch says they reveal the results of that survey. That is a vast missed opportunity and unfortunate foot shooting on the part of the government, as our respondents indicate that they are prepared to speak up, but by not creating an environment where whistleblowers feel secure and appreciated, the fight against corruption is immediately crippled.
Yeah. I think that's actually quite a poignant quote, because in many instances there are, and I think it is important actually to foreground the role in particular of public servants within the system, who very often have come forward at, I think you mentioned earlier, at risk of life and limb. And I think that is a fundamental shift that needs to happen, not only within the public service, but just generally within our societal discussions about what it means to blow the whistle and what it means to be someone who comes forward in the face of wrongdoing. I think to use perhaps a crass colloquialism, this aspect of, snitches get stitches, people sort of from an early age that notion is perpetuated, that if you call out wrongdoing, you are on the wrong side of the kind of the club, or the wrong side of the bigger picture. And I think I do appreciate that highlighting from the Corruption Watch survey, because it does speak to quite largely what it means to understand anti-corruption interventions. It isn't about large-scale, well-financed. That is important, actually, but it isn't only about well-financed, large-scale interventions from the state. It also is about the daily lived experience. What do you and I do in the face of wrongdoing, in the face of what we feel sometimes are sort of minor wrongdoings, minor corrupt activities, and I think that really is about that conversation more broadly. We asked on a social media, it was on Twitter, what does corruption, or rather International Anti-Corruption Day, mean to you as an individual? And we had a conversation with some colleagues, and part of that was really some really interesting discussions. That there are points at which, from within kind of societal discussions at home, around the braai, wherever it is, that there are things that we seem to excuse that do not fall in the category of corruption. And I suppose that is part of the fundamental problem, understanding what wrongdoing, what corruption really broadly speaking is, but in the day-to-day lived experiences is. And perhaps there is scope for those kinds of conversations. I think it is. These are draining and quite emotionally heavy conversations, if we're honest. And I think many of us tend to think, leave it to the side. But in fact, the impact on service delivery at the end of the day, the impact on public resources is so significant that perhaps there is a shift within our daily lived experiences, the conversations we are having, that must happen. So I really do think that, the kind of work that Corruption Watch, for instance, is doing and engaging members of the public, engaging the youth and so on, is really important.
Melusi, in a piece, Zugiswa, just wrote, she reminds us of what the anti-corruption strategy lists as enabling factors for effective anti-corruption interventions, public-private collaboration, political support, resolute enforcement, and so on. Now, only yesterday, I think it was, we had the Public Service Commissioner, Dr. Somadoda Figeni, talking about, we were talking about the lifestyle audits, that a process that is set to begin in February. Over the past year, they were looking at guidelines, training some people, on how to conduct these or help conduct these audits and so on. Just your view, because this is something that we've been talking about as a country for a while now. Finally, well, hopefully, in February, it will indeed, this process is going to begin. And it's just your thoughts on lifestyle audits and, where you think they will take us, given the experiences we're talking about now, where there was a lot of talk about supporting state law enforcement agencies, but that support is nowhere near, where it should be.
Yeah, it's no doubt it can be an activity that's viewed as good practice. Perhaps even in some part of the world, it's viewed as best practice. The question is, what will be the parameters of these lifestyle audits? For example, illicit enrichment, for example, in South Africa is not viewed as a criminal offense as such, though money laundering is. And I raise this because, there are legal hoops that one needs to jump, essentially, to be able to hold someone accountable, or at least to be able to trace money that they have obtained illegitimately with regards to that. So lifestyle audits, who are they going to be for? Are they going to also involve the political elites, or is it just going to be the little people? What does it mean to have a lifestyle audit? Are we talking about looking at how many houses someone has? So it's also then we have to question how wide will the scope be, and how far-reaching will the consequences be if you're found to be off in some respects as a government official.
So, we focused a lot, on what the government, is expected to do, and I think correctly, and one is not apologetic about that, because they have been elected, they have been put in positions that we have allowed them, to put up structures to deal with these things. So the bulk of the focus of our conversation, I think, is correctly on whether they are delivering on the mandate that we've given them, and the resources that they have been allocated from our fiscus to do exactly that. But very briefly, just by way of conclusion, as people say, it always takes two to tango. It's other people, usually from the private sector or civil society, that bribe, public servants, or that collude with them to do or to commit the wrongs. Just your thoughts on, what civil society, business and other players, should really be doing in enhancing the effort we are actually expecting, and correctly so, government institutions to actually deliver on.
Yeah, I think to conclude and to be brief, I'll try my best. But certainly, perhaps it is easiest to stick to, the civil society space. The private sector, I think, is a very complex space in many respects, and there is much to be said about that. And a lot of important things to be said about the role of the private sector. We've seen, for example, what various private audit companies have done themselves, but perhaps to talk about the role of civil society entities. And I think right now where we are is there are really important opportunities for reform. One of those is the space of public procurement reform, where many civil society entities, actors, in fact, the private sector is quite, as you can imagine, given the private interests that are aligned with procurement, are very much in that space. So the public procurement, or rather the draft public procurement bill, is a really important space, and it does seem that many have stepped up to the challenge to give their inputs on ensuring that reform space is adequately managed or happens in meaningful ways. The other space is exactly this kind of anti-corruption space. So Corruption Watch, I think, has done some amazing work in that space, as have many others. But in particular, in partnering with government, partnering with the state to better understand and to co-produce solutions to fight corruption. That is a really important space. And I think there are many organizations and individuals and activists who have taken up, again, that challenge and have stepped up. Lastly, I would say that, the sorts of interventions that are about raising the alarm, at whatever level of government, corruption or potentially corruption happens is really important. So the role of individuals, the role of community actors, the role of people who take it upon themselves to raise alarms, whether it is right at the local level within the public sphere, that as well is really, really important. The role of social audits. I think there are many organizations, many community-based organizations who are taking the time to track delivery against what is promised, but also taking the time to raise, again, issues with misuse of funds, with contracting problems. I certainly think that all of those spaces are spaces that have been taken up by civic actors, but certainly that more people can come into that space. And I think the public education interventions as well about what is corruption and what is the impact for all of us at the end of the day are really important. So I would say that those are important spaces that need more and more people to step into them. The private sector, I think, is maybe an hour in itself that we can dedicate.
Okay, but we have run out of time. We're going to leave it there for this evening. And on a note, a colleague just sent me one Athol Williams, who put out a couple of tweets saying, apparently he's a whistleblower. He says he's not receiving any help from the city of Cape Town, from the Western Cape government, from the government of South Africa. He's a whistleblower, but he's now stranded and exposed. I have not received any help from the South African government, no protection, no support, no advice, no cash, no visit, no call, no letter, no email, no SMS, no WhatsApp, nothing, not a thing. That's not a situation I think we want to. I have no context, obviously, to this particular message, but that's not the kind of situation we want to put whistleblowers in if we are to win this war against this sketch. But that's where we're going to leave this discussion for this evening. After the break, oil and gas exploration versus the environment. Is it either or? We discussed the issues on a day the energy minister laid into those opposed to oil and gas exploration, saying they are holding back the country's economic development prospects, asking that South Africans should have a very sober discussion about how we deal with this matter. That conversation coming up in a moment. The Minister of Mineral Resources, Gwede Mantashe, has come out strongly in support of the energy company Shell's plan to explore for oil and gas on the Wild Coast in the Eastern Cape. The move is being opposed by environmental groups.
Shell's move to explore for oil and gas in the Wild Coast has been met with protests and court challenges by a number of environmental groups, including Greenpeace. The latest court challenge is due to be heard by the Eastern Cape High Court next week. But Mineral Resources Minister Gwede Mantashe says the environmental concerns are unfounded.
Seismic surveys have wide applications used globally and in South Africa, including in the military, in the identification of national maritime zones and boundaries, scientific research of seabed geology, and more recently, seismic surveys are also used for accurate placement of offshore renewable energy infrastructure. That is to determine the best suited location for offshore wind turbines. Now, the application of all these seismic surveys worldwide have not been met with resistance we are seeing in our upstream petroleum space.
Mantashe says exploring for minerals is key to achieving economic development in order to create employment and reduce poverty in South Africa and in Africa as a whole.
Africa deserves an equal chance to develop its economies on the strength of their natural resources. Several countries on the African continent have announced their oil and gas finds, which present massive opportunities for economic growth, industrialization, and job creation. As these developments unfold, we have noted with interest the pushback and objections from environmental lobby groups against the development of these resources. And we're making this point in view of the increase in unemployment. It's now standing at 34.9%. And we're unlikely to reverse that unless we unleash development.
He then appealed to those who are opposed to the shell exploration on the Wild Coast to change their mind and allow the project to go ahead.
We therefore appeal to all objectors to acknowledge this and allow South Africa to exploit its natural resources for the benefit of its citizens. Investors in South African upstream petroleum space are assured of our commitment to work with them within the confines of the law to ensure that exploitation of these resources is done in an environmentally friendly manner and benefit of all South Africans.
The Eastern Cape provincial government has also expressed support for the shell exploration, saying it will better the lives of poor communities in the area. Mbongeni Muchwa, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, of course, as you saw, as you heard in that insert, the community and the environmentalists last week lost their urgent application to block Shell from proceeding with the seismic survey of the Eastern Cape coast. Mantashe this afternoon addressing that media briefing from where Mbongeni Muchwa put together, that insert, where the minister put forward the government's stance not only on the Shell case, but also on all other attendant issues. Now, one of the people who was part of that briefing is Ntokozo Ngcwabe, who is the Deputy Director General in the Department of Energy. But we've also asked Cormac, Cullinan of the Cullinan and Associates, who represented the environmentalists on that case, to join us for this conversation, which we hope will enlighten South Africans this evening. Good evening to both of you, and thank you so much for your time. DDG, if I may start with you. You made quite a number of points during that briefing today. And I want to start with the issue of the reason why a country or anyone would allow companies like your Shells and Totals to come and do, exploration. And I know this is something we perhaps take for granted. It may be a tedious exercise as well. But I think in the understanding of these issues, these things need to be said. Why would a country bring in these people to do exploration? What's the point of the exercise?
Good evening, Vuyo, and to the viewers at home. Let me start by indicating, Vuyo, that I've been raising this with your team, your technical team. Your line is quite bad. If they could please attend to that. I keep losing you. But I think I got your question.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping it'll be fine
companies...
because we are hearing you loudly and clearly. But we'll try and fix that in the meantime. But go ahead, DDJ. Thank you.
Okay. On your question about why are we allowing, or why would a country allow companies to come and do exploration in South Africa? Well, the main objective is economic growth, obviously. But secondly, we also need to meet our energy demand as a country. And we can only do that through the exploitation of our resources that are buried in the ground. And for these resources to be exploited, there has to be exploration. There has to be investments into exploration. So in a nutshell, that is the why. These are the drivers for us. It's economic growth, it's job creation, but also for us to meet our energy needs as a country.
Cormac, you're not arguing against that, are you?
Yes, I am. I think that what's happened is that, with respect, the government haven't really caught up to where we are in the world. So you can't just say that economic growth is good and jobs are good without asking what kind of growth and what kind of jobs. So if you're employing people to contribute to climate change, to destroy the future of young people and threaten the lives of all South Africans, that's not a good thing to do. If you're creating jobs for renewable energies that will create a sustainable future, that is a good thing. And we don't think, in fact, it's not just we, the whole world doesn't think that one should be expanding oil and gas fields at this time. Even the International Energy Agency has said that all new investments should cease from this year.
DDG, I mean, I'm just quoting from comments you made during that briefing. You said, one, a lot of research goes into this. You enlist the expertise of independent people. You also said that you do benchmark, and that's an important component. You also said that you do ensure that the industry is regulated. Those, I would imagine, are, in other words, you are saying you do this responsibly. Okay, well, I'll try to fix that line. Cormac, yes, did you hear me?
I am. I'm catching bits and pieces of what you're saying, Vuyo. But let me just make an attempt to respond on the parts that I heard. Yes, indeed, we do continuous research on both sectors that we regulate, and that is energy and mining. But we also do a lot of benchmarking. And we do that so that our regulations or regulatory frameworks that we come up with are always supported and backed up by science, proven science. So you are correct. We do that on an ongoing basis. That is why the NEMA regulations that we apply when we issue or process applications for environmental authorizations, we take into consideration high standards against the research and benchmarking that we would have done to say, in today's terms, what technologies are applied such that there is minimal impact on the environment and there's strong mitigation measures on the proposed exploration programs.
Cormac?
I'm afraid I must disagree once again. Here we have this particular seismic survey is being undertaken on the basis of an environmental management program that was drafted in 2013 by people who didn't have particular expertise in that field. and has taken no account of the scientific research which has been done since 2013, which establishes unequivocally that this is extremely harmful to the environment. For example, their studies were based on the idea that an air gun would kill plankton within 10 meters. And now the latest studies show that one air gun will kill 50% of plankton within 1 kilometer. So it's not correct that it's informed by the latest science. And the other thing, of course, is that much of this harm cannot be prevented. It simply creatures in the marine environment have evolved to be particularly sensitive to sound because sound travels very, very well in water. And they are going to be hugely affected by extremely loud, unrelenting sounds, which is caused by this exploration over long periods of time. This is sound that has been designed to penetrate the earth itself beneath the seabed. What can you imagine what it will do to the soft bodies of an octopus or a squid?
Well, I mean, the minister told us today that, after the 2013 impact assessment, environmental impact assessment study, in 2020, then an independent audit was conducted.
Yeah, the minister's right about that. But the independent audit, well, it was done by the same people who did the original study, so it's arguable how independent that is. But it was simply to determine whether they'd been complying with the environmental management program, which is not difficult to comply with when you haven't started. But the real issue is that they should have got an environmental authorization under the National Environmental Management Act, and they didn't. And had they done that, they would have had to look at the provisions of the Integrated Coastal Management Act, which says that the duty of the state is to be the public trustee to look after this area, coastal waters, for all the people of South Africa, and particularly for coast-dependent communities. So this is an area which deserves a particularly high level of protection, and that simply has been ignored by the officials. They haven't even mentioned the Integrated Coastal Management Act, the most important bit of legislation in their documents.
Why was the environmental impacts not done, DG, or was it not done?
No, they all at the time they applied at 20.
No, okay, yes, DG, go ahead.
I must say I'm still struggling to hear you clearly, guys. Sure. But let me say this. There was an environmental authorization issued by the Petroleum Agency of South Africa, which is a regulatory body reporting to the department. That was done in 2013. And when the NEMA regulations were amended later on, there's provision as part of the transitional arrangements to move from the previous regulations to the new regulations for companies to do audits or to undertake audits, which audit was done in 2020. The fact that the independence of the environmentalist who did the audit is being questioned puzzles us, because independence in this case is independent of the government, but also independent of the company, somebody outside of Shell and somebody outside of the DMRE or PASA. So from where we sit, and this we've been vindicated on this by the court on its latest judgment. This was done and it was found to have been done properly. But let me also say this for you. When we go through the EIA or EMPR processes, including the audit in 2020, by the way, we do publish the draft EMPRs. We do publish these documents for interested and affected parties to comment, but also to raise their objections. And we did not receive any objections in 2020. And on the basis of that and the comments that were received at the time, the Petroleum Agency then found and concluded that the EMPR was still relevant and it contains sufficient mitigation measures.
Okay.
But let me also speak to this point. I couldn't hear much about the comments on the seismic surveys themselves and the sounds. You know, science has proven, Vuyo, that shipping vessels actually release far more sounds than seismic surveys for petroleum, oil and gas seismic surveys. And the mitigation measures that we apply are so thorough. We do pre-watch surveys for about an hour before the start of the operation. And that pre-watch, that 60 minutes pre-watch survey is to ensure that there are no mammals or any fauna for that matter that is observed in that hour before the start of the operation. And when the operations begin, when the operations are initiated, we deploy what we call a soft start, which is meant to ensure that should there be any fauna in the vicinity of a 500-meter buffer, they start to swim away from the area. Thirdly, once the survey begins, should there be any mammal or any species that is sensed or spotted, operations are brought to a complete halt. But lastly, at any given point in time during a survey, we have independent observers on the vessel, but we also have acoustic specialists who continue to observe and produce reports on a daily basis. And those reports are submitted daily to the regulator, that is PASA, and the Department of Environment. So mitigation measures that we apply are far more stringent than any other sectors do.
Cormac, I wanted to comment on this process, which to a layperson like me sounds thorough. And of course, I mean, if you have a different experience or you know something, I don't know, you're going to say that in the couple of minutes we have left. But I want you to say upfront why you didn't see the need to comment.
Well, this is very interesting, because if you look at how many people in South Africa are very upset about what's happening right now, and then you see that there wasn't a single comment, to me what that shows was that the public participation process failed horribly, because the notice that was published just said that independent environmental consultancy had been appointed to do a compliance compliance audit, and the audit report will be available in due course. It simply didn't alert people, and that's why to what was going on, and that's why there were no responses at all. So it's evidence of a failed public participation process, not that there weren't any problems. And the DG has outlined the measures that are being taken, I believe are being taken to mitigate the harm. The trouble is that they won't work. It doesn't deal with the beaked whales and creatures like that are deep and often aren't on the surface. The observers can't see anything at night when it's carrying on. You certainly can't observe the damage to the plankton and the fish and the eggs and many of the other creatures. It's quite possible if you see whales that you can stop for a while and wait for the whales to move away. But the idea that having a 500-meter exclusion zone around the vessel for whales somehow protects them from terribly loud sound that can travel hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers, is absurd. So it's not a question of whether or not they're doing what everybody else does when it comes to undertaking these surveys. It's a question of whether harm is caused or not. And our experts tell us that that significant harm will be caused to individual animals and to populations and to the ecosystems as a whole.
Okay. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We're going to leave it there for this evening. Special thanks to both my guests, Ndogozo Ngwabe, who is the DDG with the Mineral and Energy Department, and Cormac Cullinan, who is the Director of Cullinan and Associates, the company that represented the people who took the company, who took the Shell case on behalf of an organization called Natural Justice. For now, we're going to leave it there, but we have by no means exhausted this subject. But that's our show for this evening. To join us again tomorrow when we're talking the South African Constitution, celebrating 25 years tomorrow. Judge Albie Sachs will be our guest. To join us then. Good night.